Hello. Welcome. Alright. We're gonna give this a go. Alright, just to provide a little bit of context to those watching. First of all, the music in the background is the soundtrack to the current expansion. Of course, there's a Umbar. I wanted something in the background while I was talking, so hopefully some of it is... it's just kind of there, right? Alright. And it's just playing on a play all thing, so sometimes it may sound inappropriate because it's not really whatever. I just want some music in the background. In the meantime, we'll get to the actual gameplay later. But today I'd like to present a paper that I gave last week on April 6th, 2024 at TextMoot, which is an academic conference hosted by Signum University. Full disclosure, I work for them as their digital moot facilitator, website coordinator, Twitch administrator, Discord administrator. I do things. What TextMoot is a moot. What a moot is, for us, is that we send Professor Corey Olson to a place. People submit papers, academic or otherwise, presentations, and then they give the presentations. We all have a lot of discussion, fun, and people who are on site get to go have dinner, or there might be some other side activities, but for the most part, those who can't be there in person can either present or just attend remotely. And my job as the digital moot facilitator is to make sure that goes well. That being said, it has been a long time since I've actually done proper academic presentations. I did one in 2020 for the first online Myth Mooch shortly after the pandemic started. And I did one last month. Was it last month or the month before? I forget. March? Was it March or February? I don't remember. For... was it Sunshine Moot? I think it was Sunshine Moot. I get to attend all of the moots, so eventually they start kind of blending in together. Apologies. But the theme for TextMoot was, in essence, games, narrative, story, basically story and narrative through games, right? And in this particular case, the moot had a couple of presentations about Final Fantasy, as you might expect. I did my paper here that we're about to experience again. And then there are some other ones. I'm kind of blanking on them right now, and I do apologize because they were all really good. So in terms of moots, some of the moots are like really super, like, full-on academic conference kind of things, right? And sometimes the moots like this one are, for me, a lot more fun because it's about something that I'm very interested in, which is games, and in this case, video gaming. And Corey was talking about this. For those who aren't aware, Professor Corey Olson is the founder, president, chief bottle washer, and all-around good guy who runs Signum University, also known as the Tolkien Professor, and I'm extremely privileged to get to work for that guy, because even in the face of the height of the negativity surrounding Rings of Power, he genuinely reached out to people and who did not like it at all and wanted to have, like, to discuss it, in a reasonable setting, no judgment, no whatever. And not too many people took him up on that. But in the face of that, he still maintained his usual overall positive sort of mentality on both the show. I think for him, the jury is still out on whether it's good or not. He's mostly focusing right now on whether it's a decent adaptation. But this is not This is not about Rings of Power. This is about video games. Or this is about a specific video game. And recently, Corey, who is also, like me, a fellow streamer on the official LotRO company channel, twitch.tv/LotRO stream. He recently, by recently, like in the past couple of months, completed the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. Now, this is the second time he's been through, but this is the first time he went through and did the whole 9 yards. In that text mode, his keynote speech was mentioning some of the topics that I discussed here in enough detail that I was in Slack at the time freaking out. Oh, okay, yeah, I was freaking out. Going, oh my god, Corey, stop stealing my content! It was actually kind of rather funny. I think everybody else was kind of amused about it. But, as he likes to say, he was just setting me up. And he did a wonderful job of that, as he always does. However, that being said, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read the script that I wrote. I have amended it a little bit. I've amended some of my slides a little bit because one of the things about Corey's playing a LotRO is that he is not as... And I'll mention this at one point in the speech, but mainly when I gave this talk at TextMoot, I had to limit my comments to stuff before the content he's played through, or up to the point of the content. He couldn't really talk about stuff, and because, and again, I'll talk about why that is, but because this is the extended edition, I can add more, and so I've updated my script a little bit. This won't be like the one I gave, the talk I gave about music in LotRO at a previous moot, where I actually wrote a very long script and then had to tailor it down to my time. This one wound up being where I wanted it to be to start with. I was given 30 minutes, and when I got done practicing my talk, it was 25, so I'm like, okay. And so we'll see how that goes. And of course, we're not going to have the questions and answers afterwards because, it is what it is. Unless people in chat have questions. We'll see. Anyhow. Let me have a quick listen. I'm going to see how loud the music is in the background. Oh, this is actually rather festive. But I'm going to bring this down a little bit so you can hear me. And this is literally just playing on YouTube in the background. Alright. So, The Beckoning Sea is actually a really good song from the current soundtrack. Anywho, let's get into it. And, yeah, let's see what we got here. Alright. Launched in April of 2007, the massively multiplayer online role-playing game, The Lord of the Rings Online, started out relatively small, focusing on the story of Eriador, with players up against a threat coming from Angmar in the days after Frodo and the hobbits left the Shire for Rivendell. These days, LotRO's real estate stretches from Ered Luin in the west to the Iron Hills in the east, from Gundabad in the north to the city of Umbar in the south, and many of the lands in between. LotRO completed the Quest of the Ring in 2017 and is currently telling the story of what happened in the south after the wedding of Aragorn and Arwen. At last reckoning, with over 12,000 quests to complete, it's at least a few years away from even beginning to tell the story of the journey back to the Shire. The developers at Standing Stone Games, who are captains of this particular ship, have spoken of having years and years worth of ideas they can put into the game, if they're given the opportunity to do so. One of their key tenets has always been a scrupulous adherence to the books, with any deviation mostly due to the logistics of building a video game world that needs to be traversable, and also working within the limitation that their license does not include permission to directly quote the texts. The devs had to become, in essence, professional paraphrasers. As a note to fellow LotRO players in the audience, or who watch this later asynchronously, Signum University's community has a tradition of not spoiling the story beyond that which Corey has experienced. As of April 6, 2024, Professor Corey Olsen has only completed the Mordor Besieged flashback of the Minas Morgul expansion, so has not completed the Black Book of Mordor, much less anything added to the game since then other than the wedding of Aragorn and Arwen itself. This includes the lower level content in Swanfleet, Cardolan, the Yonder Shire, the Angle of Mythithil, and the Wildwood. Please keep that in mind if you speak with him about the game's story at some point, but hopefully he'll continue his in-game journey soon, and we can happily talk about talk with him about some of the stuff that I mentioned in this expanded edition of the paper that wasn't mentioned at TextMoot on April 6th. Now, as one of the largest MMORPGs out there in terms of sheer landscape to play through, much of LotRO is contiguous, and yes, you can walk into Mordor as long as you do the correct quest first. Corey has spoken of this on more than one occasion during his LotRO live streams, that LotRO has had one advantage that no previous video game, or movie, or even television adaptation has had so far: format. MMOs aren't made to tell finite stories. As long as someone's willing to pay the bills, including continuing any necessary licensing, an MMO can just keep on going, adding more and more content over time. LotRO has had the benefit of the same two primary lore masters and storytellers whose task it has been to translate the books into video game format over the past 20 plus years. This includes the years of development from before the game's launch. Chris Pearson on the right is the lore master with reams and reams of notes and deep dives to provide to the rest of the team when they're crafting not only the story, but also the appearance of the landscape, towns, cities, and even people. Jeff, Maid of Lions Libby, is the senior content designer and storyteller, responsible for the overall game story and the epic quest line. I was looking for a much better photo of Chris and Jeff for this presentation. This was taken from one of Corey's interviews with them back in October of 2016. And technology was very different 8 years ago. Well, 7.5 years ago. And the chemistry here, the grins, it was just, this was perfect. So there we go. That being said, LotRO has had... together, they and their colleagues have had the privilege of taking each line of The Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and the appendices, the only bits of the legendarium Standing Stone Games has the license to directly adapt, to build a world that we as players can inhabit. They don't have to limit themselves to having some actor with only 1 or 2 lines standing in the background. They don't have to settle for name dropping or if you know moments, like even Rings of Power had to do in many scenes in Numenor. They didn't have to cut out this guy. One of the greatest challenges Pearson, Libby, and company had to overcome was what to do with the interstitial spaces. The books are all well and dandy, but even if you squeezed every single line into quest text or artwork depicting things like the inside of Metacell, for example, there still isn't enough to do more than make a step-by-step retelling of the story. The genius of LotRO and its dev team has been making it a living world by doing flashbacks to past events the player character wouldn't be present at through a mechanism called session play. You can be at the swearing of the Oath of the Isildur at the Stone of Erech as a soldier in his army. You can play through Boromir's Lapse at Parthgalen as Frodo in one session, and then in another session, you play as Boromir as he redeems himself by saving Merry and Pippin. You are Gollum as he smacks Samwise up the head with a rock and fights Frodo to seize the ring and then dance around until he slips and falls into the magma, the session being Frodo's recounting of what really happened at the Crack of Doom. They've added quests that enhance the text or fill in a what-if narrative, and by asking questions such as, who were the other rangers who accompanied Halbrand to Rohan as the Grey Company to seek out Aragorn, and what happened to them along the way? Or, what really happened to Iarnur after he rode to Minas Morgul in wrath? Basically, the dev team saw each line, and... the dev team saw each line, The dev team saw each line and potential plot hook as a series of rabbit holes to explore, and off we went, chasing after every white rabbit in sight. Another triumph in this regard is the way developers wove the overall game's narrative to include the player's character just enough that they mattered to the world but didn't supersede the book characters. We also don't feel like the junior varsity team compared to the lower characters. The trust and high regard the lower characters have for our characters is earned over time, both in character via quests and in terms of storytelling structure. These additions had an extra layer of world building to them because beyond the relatively easy task of simply not contradicting Tolkien himself, The quests created by the dev team that extrapolate on what Tolkien wrote also had to feel like they could have been written by Tolkien. The characters involved needed to feel as real and as part of the narrative as anyone the professor created himself. If players can forget that a Standing Stone created character, such as Nan the Slakeless, wasn't actually created by Tolkien, then the devs did their job well. And this is a fact that I totally forgot when I beat Hrimhill Frostheart for the very first time in the Hidden Horde raid, because and there is video proof of my mistake when I was like, wow, Standing Stone really had some brass killing off a lore character, and then later on I realized, well, wait a minute, no, he's not. He didn't exist in the books at all. There is no Nan who is the son of Dan Ironfoot. He succeeds him as Lord of the Iron Hills. He is the brother of the canonical King Thorin III Stonehelm of Erebor, and he is the uncle of equally non-canonical Prince Durin. He fought at the Battle of Five Armies, sure, and has an agate eye and a gold spear due to injury sustained in it. He wields something called the Black Mattock, which you can kind of just see in his little photo there, coming up from over his right shoulder. He is very much not happy that the Black Book of Mordor was stashed in a hidden room and is very keeping Yarnfast in the Iron Hills. And spoilers for Corey, don't watch this. He does indeed have a heroic ending with a critical attack upon the dragon Hrimhill Frostheart by smacking her upside the snoot with the Grey Maul with a mithril hammer. Very, very lovely scene in that raid. Now, sometimes quests that we're given don't fulfill a specific narrative role or flesh out a snippet in the books because it's extrapolating from the books. But on the other hand, there are whole swaths of the game that do nothing more than take a song and turn the names into three-dimensional characters with backstories that, when we who know the lore first encounter these characters in the game, our initial reaction is going to be more akin to, oh no. I'm speaking, of course, of the Song for the Fallen at the Pelennor Fields, often called the Mounds of Mundburg. It's attributed to an unnamed poet from Rohan some years later, but LotRO gave him a name and a backstory. And if you want to laugh uncontrollably, I highly recommend Corey's live streams on the official LotRO channel when he's playing his Hobbit Burglar Grifflet, and he's reading this guy's texts in a Yosemite Sam sort of voice. It's a whole ass thing. However, the poem in the book, following a prose notice that Halbarad of the Rangers did not survive the battle, nor did two others named in the poem, pretty much only gives a listing of most of those names, with a few notes about where some of them come from. Please allow me to read the poem, and please forgive the fact that I am not a dramatic poet who is adept at reading and speaking in this form. Apologies to my old D&D DM, Richard Rowland, who is a German philology graduate at Signum University. We heard of the horns in the hills ringing, the swords shining in the South Kingdom. Steeds went striding in the Stoning Land as wind in the morning. War was kindled. There Theoden fell, Thangling mighty, to his golden halls and green pastures in the northern fields, never returning, high lord of the host. Harding and Guthlab, Dunhir and Derwini, doughty Grimbold, Herefara and Herobrand, Horn and Fostred, fought and fell there in a far country. In the mounds of Mundburg under mould they lie, with their league fellows, lords of Gondor. Neither Helluin the fair to the hills by the sea, nor Forlong the old to the flowering vales, ever to Arnok, to his own country returned in triumph. Nor the tall bowmen, Derfin and Dwelin, to their dark waters, the meres of Morthond under mountain shadows. Death in the morning at day's ending, lords took and lowly. Long now they sleep under grass in Gondor by the great river. Grey now is tears, gleaming silver, red than it rolled roaring water. Foam dyed with blood flamed at sunset, as beacons mountains burned at evening. Red fell the dew in Ramos Echo. Most of these names in this poem are just that, names in a list. Tolkien never really told us who these people were, who their families were. We know little more of them than that Forlong had been hewed by axes before he fell, or Halbarad was dour-handed, or Guthlob was Theoden's standard bearer. If you look at their entries on such as the Tolkien Gateway Wiki, most of them only have a couple of lines based on the text, and then much longer paragraphs based on the game's content. The player-created and maintained LotRO Wiki contains full details of each of these characters' quests and interaction, with full spoilers and screenshots showing their appearances. Out of all of these, Horn is the one whose role was expanded the most, becoming one of the player's traveling companions after first meeting him in Stangard near Parth Celebrant when the player is around level 75, when the game currently has 150 levels. Horn is also part of the largest branch in the game's narrative, a Schrödinger-like choice where certain quests will change, even up to the current expansion, based on whether or not the player did a specific, seemingly unrelated quest way back at level 65, involving a ranger named Halros, whose assignment was to protect the Shire. If the player doesn't do the quest at all, or tells Halros to stay in the Shire to keep an eye on what that shifty Lotho Sackville Baggins is up to, then Horn will suffer his fate as Tolkien wrote it. If the player tells Halros to follow the call to form the Great Company and ride south to Aragorn, then Halros will take the sword stroke that would have slain Horn. However, the game cleverly has a war-weary Horn choosing to walk away and leave his name behind and tell people Horn died on the Pelennor, thus keeping the song accurate from a certain point of view. Those of you who have watched my LotRO streams will know that Horn still has a role to play in the current Corsairs of Umbar expansion, whether he's alive or not. His story is still relevant in content released over 7 years later. For the rest, here's what LotRO did with them. The developers gave them homes, if one wasn't already noted in the text. They gave them friendships and rivalries, such as the bromance between Forlong and Hirluin, or Horn being a student of the self-same Rohirric poet, now named Gleoini, who would eventually write the Elegy for the Fallen. They gave them families, such as Elfhelm having a son named Elfmar, and Horn having a disapproving father named Ingvar, Reeve of the Entwash Vale. Following the simple logic that, yes, women do indeed exist in Middle-earth in roughly equal numbers to the menfolk, there are wives and sweethearts and daughters and mothers and sisters and aunties aplenty, many of whom will be leading it home while their men ride to war, or who might have had surprising and sometimes tragic ties to the lower characters. Standickstone gave all these characters personalities, such as Fastred being rather hot-tempered and having a poor opinion of Eomer's order to get his people out of the East Emnet for their own safety. We're going to go through a whole pile of these, actually every single name in the poem. We're going to start with Halbarad. In the book, he is a kinsman of Aragorn, a keeper of Arwen's standard for him, only one of the Great Company who has an actual name. He passes through the Paths of the Dead to the Stone of Eric. He fights as part of Aragorn's army at Pelargir and rides with the ships, sails with the ships, until he then falls at the Pelennor in some unknown fashion. We don't know what happened to him, he just died there. In the game, however, if you are playing Before the Shadow, you'll run into Halbarad a little bit earlier than in the original game, in that Halbarad was present at Sarn Ford when the Nazgul ran over the river, the Brandywine, and entered the Shire to go chase after Frodo. However, if you don't have Before the Shadow and haven't played that content, spoilers, you would normally encounter him in the North Downs around level 30-something, 20-something, 30-something. In his original appearance, he organizes a coalition of free peoples called the Council of the North to guard against the threat from Angmar. He is a leading figure as the player journeys with the Great Company south through Eredor to Dunland, when the player is summoned away by Galadriel to go to Lorien for reasons. He himself, during this journey, tries to make allies with a gentleman by the name of Lou Brennan, who leads the Dunlending Falcon clan. And Lou Brennan was actually, he started off as, we could use some help against the White Wizard. You want to help us? And made the Rangers do a bunch of chores. And it was interesting, but then Lou Brennan gets cold feet, and he sells the Rangers out to Saruman instead. Lothrandir gets captured and sent to Isengard. Halbarad goes and rescues said Ranger, imprisoned in Isengard. And then we don't really hear much about what he does next, except he does greet Aragorn in Rohan, because they continue their journey. They run across Aragorn in Rohan, because time compression is a thing in Lord of the Rings Online. You kind of just have to pay no attention to what time it is. For the most part. But in the story, in the game, in the Battle of Pelennor, we come to the final scene of the battle where Aragorn is facing off against Gothmog, who used to be known as Mordirith, the original baddie of Shadows of Angmar, the original vanilla LotRO. One of them anyway, because there were a couple, but he was the big bad. And, well, Gothmog / Mordirith used to be Earnur. And so there was a really clever thing the LotRO did, speaking of what happened to Earnur, is they had him basically having been turned by the Witch King into a wraith and turned into this enemy. And then Gothmog is like, you know what? I'm in Gondor. I'm still the king. However, when Aragorn and Gothmog have their little tete-a-tete on the Pelennor, there's an attack against Aragorn. Halbarad takes the blow. Very heroic. Very sad for Halbarad. But he dies protecting his chieftain. So, he doesn't die for no reason. He doesn't have the most awesome death on the Pelennor. But at least he didn't go out like a punk. Like, in the book, he's just a name in a list. We don't know if he died a heroic death or if he went out like a punk. LotRO at least lets him not go out as a punk, which is nice. Alright, next we have Harding, also known as the hard ass of the Wold. I actually did use the word hard ass to describe him briefly in the actual text moot thing. We don't swear a lot in Signum spaces. Not even like easy stuff like hell and damn. Well, we mentioned hell, the theological location. But we don't generally just say, well, damn it, or whatever. We're generally pretty PG at most. So the fact that I deliberately used the word hard ass and made people laugh made me happy. But in the book, he's just a man of Rohan who dies at the Pelennor Fields. Interestingly, Samwise's great-grandson is named Harding. So the name isn't uncommon, but it seems kind of... And it's not unknown for names to pass... Because that was a lore point in the books that Rohan knew about hobbits. What the hell? Like, even Mary was like, what? They know about us? So there's definitely some ties between the Rohirrim and the hobbits. And I'm thinking, the Rohirrim came from the north. The river hobbits in the Gladden Fields. Yeah, anyhow. Back to Harding. In the game, he's called the Aldor if the East End meant Reeve of the Wold, as you can see by his title. He oversees all the reeves of the East Emnet. He is also the Thane of Harwick and the Reeve of the Wold. For those who don't play LotRO, these titles were made up by the game to kind of give a hierarchy to who's in charge of whom in Rohan. So you can kind of think of Aldor kind of like a prime minister. A little bit, maybe like a United States president, sort of. Just ignore the fact there's an actual king above that. Reeve is kind of like a governor, overseeing several towns, several counties and towns. And Thane is kind of like a mayor. The Thane is basically in charge of this one town, and that's about it. And as you can see, one person can hold all three roles. And then there are some people who might be a Reeve of one thing and a Thane of something else, but not be the actual Aldor. Harding has a son named Leodwig that the player will rescue from near death. He was mentioned as a dying man when we first run across him, and then we save his life. It's really cool. Harding is most definitely not a fan of Grima Wormtongue or of Theoden or in Rohan's decline. Okay, let me rephrase that. He's not a fan of Grima, and he's also not a fan of Theoden and Rohan's decline. I want to make sure he loves his king. He just doesn't like what's going on with him. He is very much a mistrustful man until you prove yourself, and he calls a witan, which is kind of like a moot of humans, to decide the fate of the entire East Emnet with the other Reeves, and he defends Hootbolt. I love how we say that, Hootbolt, when the orcs attack. It's kind of like the Fire Nation attacking in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Alright, then we have Guthlav. In the book, he is Theoden's banner bearer, has a horn. Oh man, I hate that. Has a horn that the king shatters with a forceful winding at the beginning of the charge of the Pelennor. I actually have a conch horn here that I would love to blow and be very, very loud, except it would scare the cats and annoy my neighbors. And it wouldn't shatter because it's made out of, like, seashell. When he fell with Theoden, the banner had to be taken from his cold, dead hand to give to Eomer. And that's basically how the kingship passed from one man to the other by the banner. In the game, though, he is dismissed from his role as banner bearer by Grima. He lives in a town called Imping, interesting name, which is a lumber camp in the Eastfold, son of the Thane Sparhafok. And yeah, I've said that name wrong a few times too. He has a brother named Merigith, and he asked the player to visit the tomb at Halifirion because he didn't have the opportunity to do so himself as he rode with Theoden to Gondor. For those who know the lore will know what the tomb at Halifirion is actually, but the game can't mention it because it's not part of the trilogy, the appendices, or the Hobbit. The tomb at Halifirion is where Elendil is buried. Not in Innuminous like the game has Elendil's tomb in big honkin' tomb in the middle of, the sunken Innuminous. Yeah, no. Nope. Halifirion is the wider legendarium resting place of Elendil the Tall. So, it's kind of cool that you get sent up to do that, but they can't actually say what it is, so it's kind of like Standing Stone going, wink. Alright, Dun here. In the book, he is Erkenbrand's nephew, Lord of Harrowdale, commanded the cavalry at the Second Battle of the Fords of Isen. The one that, sent the orcs back after the first one killed Theodred. He did not participate in the Battle of Helm's Deep. In the game, this is one of the rare instances where the book had more to say about him than the game did. In the game, he's the Lord of Dunharrow and Underharrow, but players, we don't get to meet him until we go into the Druidon Forest, and we don't really get to interact with him anymore, until he is then slain by an arrow meant for Eomer on the Pelennor, very close to where Eomer gets his little, his eucatastrophe moment of, oh, ships, black sails, shit. Oh wait, no, it's the good guys, yay! I'm gonna throw my sword up in the air and start singing. I try to imagine how the hell that would work in like a cinematic sense. Like you're gonna throw your sword up in the air. Okay, well the pommel is heavy, so theoretically it should come right back down, handle down, but... Okay. The singing I also don't get. It's like, is he just like singing a note? Is he singing a song? We don't know. Anyhow, back to people who actually died at the battle. Darwini. In the book, he is the leader of the King's Riders. He replaces Hama as Doorward after Hama is killed holding the doors at the Battle of Helm's Deep. He himself is killed during the Witch King's attack upon Theoden because as the leader of the King's Riders, he would have been riding as behind the king as as close to the back, as close on Snowmane's heels as he possibly could, except the king, being in a fey mood, as they say, was racing ahead of his entire party. Because the king probably still would have died, even if he didn't outstrip his loyal King's Riders. In the game, though, he's got a fiancée. Her name is Winsig, the Thane of Walstow. You do some quests for her. His father is Gisil of the Thane of Garsfeld, who sadly dies in the attack on Hootbolt at the Witan, and his brother's named Gisling. He participates in the Battle of Helm's Deep, and he is responsible for finding the player somewhere to crash out after the battle. So he has a little bit to do. Not a lot, but a little bit. But he is going to leave a fiancé behind when he dies. Grimbold of Grimslade. We meet him first in Dunland. He holds the fords of Eisen after the death of Theodred. He joins Erkenbrand at Gandalf's behest, and he organizes the muster of the Westfold. He is also referred to as Doughty, and that basically means, like sturdy. Like, if a hobbit is sturdy, he's also doughty. It's basically a solid member of the community, right? Pillar of the community kind of sort. In the game, though, he is the Thane of Grimslane. He has a camp due south of Isengard, which is where I got this photo from. He falls into despair after the death of Theodred until Elfhelm comes and knocks him upside the head in a figurative sense and reminds him of his duty to the living. Because Grimbold was suffering from depression after the death of his prince because he was too late to save him. And so all Grimbold wanted was to have the orcs come back and then him die defending his prince's grave or whatever. And Elfhelm said, look, you dumbass, we have more stuff to do. Not exactly what they said, but close enough. He does have a wife named Hildith, who leads Grimslade in his absence. He has a mother named Elgith. And twin mischievous sons, Grimwald and Grimbert, who challenge the player to a series of races. Twin sons. Yep. The first time I played that, I was like, what the hell? And then I'm like, oh, this is so good. This is really good. And in the battle, he is slain by a Fellbeast, specifically on the Pelennor. So he was fighting a Fellbeast, and I think they both killed each other. So that was a thing. Hadafara. In the book, he just dies on the Pelennor. Now, keep an eye on what he kind of looks like. Okay? We're going to take a look at this in a minute. He is mentioned as being the son of Reeve Herebrand of Woodhurst in the Stone Deans. His mother, Kennethrith, and his grandfather, Haramond, who is the actual Reeve, are killed by conspiracy to take over Woodhurst, but he wasn't there. He was busy leading the defense of nearby Brockbridge, which is a town ruled by Hama's father, Leoferth, which, ties into Hama the Doorward. On the ride through Druidon Forest, he goes on patrol with the players. He dies fighting side by side with his father, Herebrand, at the Pelennor, slain by Gothmog's orcs. Now, look at Herefada. Now, look at Herebrand. He does not look old enough. They do not look old enough to look. He does not look old enough to be the son of this dude. It just doesn't work for me. Now, if Herefada looked more like a teenager, that would work. But he doesn't. Anyhow, Herebrand. Note that in the book, Herefada and Herebrand are not related at all. They're just two different names. But in the book, he dies on the Pelennor. That's it. In the game, he is the father of Herefada and Thane of Woodhurst in the Stone Deans. Woodhurst is a mixed Rohirrim Dunlending town. And one of the cool things the game did was take the Dunlendings and make them three-dimensional. There are Dunlendings who just want to live their lives. There are Dunlendings who are going to kill anybody who's not Dunlending. But by making them more three-dimensional, it doesn't just say, oh, the Dunlendings are chased out and they've just been a plague on the Rohirrim ever since, and the Rohirrim are 100% always right. They made it more shades of gray. And that's very fascinating because it affects the politics, it affects the storylines, it matters, and that's really, really cool. So as I mentioned, his father Haramond, who was the Reeve before him, and his wife Kennethrith, who basically did not get killed without a fight. Let's just put that way. She gave as good as she got before they got her. She's killed by conspiracy that is trying to take over Woodhurst. Herebrand is injured in the attack in a spirited way by one of his loyalists. He rallies a council to decide what to do next, enlisting the player to discover the truth and help retake the town, because the player sure as hell wasn't there, so they couldn't have been involved with the conspiracy, so they're an innocent bystander. Here, come do some work for us. They run across the soothsayer by the name of Hildegard, who predicts his death at orcish hands. And so when he's fighting against, like, Dunlendings, he believes he's safe. So it gives him courage. But even so, he still goes to the Pelennor knowing that there are orcs there. He dies side by side with his son Herefara, slain by Gothmog's orcs on the Pelennor. Then Horn had to write a novel about that boy. He just dies on the Pelennor. In the game, he is one of the player's 3 traveling companions throughout much of Rohan, kind of like the person who gets the player involved in the story after a certain point. Involved in a large number of quests. Look at his page on the LotRO wiki. He is the focus of the game's largest branching narrative, literally or figuratively. Dies the Pelennor depending on whether or not Ranger Halros rode south with the Grey Company on that level 65 quest made of lions, you magnificent bastard. Just saying. He is a minstrel whose mentor Gleowini becomes the game's poet for the Song of the Fallen at the Pelennor, which was written years later, and I think it was also referred to as the last song the poet ever wrote kind of deal. But the game says, yep, Gleowini did it. His disapproving father Ingbert is the Reeve of Entwash Vale. He has a grandmother named Goda. He has a brother named Ingmar. And his sister Ingith was betrothed to Theodred. Oh. And of course that means we are left in the position of knowing what happened to Theodred, thanks to the earlier session play. And our player also knows the truth, and everybody shushes us. Don't tell her. Don't tell her. Keep the truth from her. Because, you know, it's like, whoa, how's my bow doing? Can't tell you. He is exiled to Stanguard by Theoden for saying a little bit too much at Medicil that was not to Grima's liking. He is forbidden to return on pain of death, but of course he breaks this because he felt his duty to his king was more important than his duty to the king's treacherous advisor. He has this cute, it's so freaking cute enemies to lover story with the Dunlending woman Noda, the ghost of Wadu. And by the time of the Pelennor, and even actually as of the current time in the game in the Corsairs of Umbar expansion, she is carrying his child. He is scornful of the soothsayer Hildegard because he was there when Hildegard mentioned to Herbrand that he was going to die. And Nona, of course, believed Hildegard and was very upset with Horn that Horn was rather scornful. Horn was scornful. Scornful Horn. Because Nona had a high regard for soothsayers of this nature, but she was also freaking out because Hildegard said that he was going to die at the Pelennor. And how do we know that Nona is still carrying his child as of the Corsairs of Umbar? Well, you just have to play the Corsairs of Umbar. What I find very fascinating is that, again, Maid of Lions, you magnificent bastard. I love Maid of Lions. He is so awesome. And that was like one of the things that we were all expecting the Corsair J-Jax. Of course, J-Jax was going to be in Corsairs of Umbar. That was a given. But this was something that the storyline, even if Horn is dead, actual dead, is still there are still ties to this story in the current expansion, which again, that's Standing Stone being magnificent in what they do. Next up, we have Fostred. Now to shift gears a little bit. Fostred is in the books. He dies at the Pelennor. Eleanor Gamgee marries a Fostred of Greenholm, later named First Warden of Westmarch. So again, that's a Rohirrim Hobbit name thingy going on there. In the game, he is the Reeve of the Sutcrofts, the Thane of Snowbourne. And if one has read the original Neil Gaiman written Marvel 1602, kind of reminds you of the appearance of the 1602 version of Steve Rogers as a Native American who was actually blonde, and that's exact same hairstyle he was wearing in that comic. It was so bizarre. Not the Marvel 1602 that was recently during an episode of Marvel What If. It's almost completely different. Anyhow, our Fastred here is Reeve of the Sutcroft Thane of Snowbourne, where there is a beautiful fishing puddle in the middle of the streets that Standing Stone has yet to fix. I love it because I go in there and go fishing in the middle of the street. He is young. He doesn't look 24 years young in this image, but he's 24 years old. He's very hot-tempered, and he's very stubborn. He refuses Eomer's order to evacuate his people across the Antwash into the Westemnet for their own safety, because orcs. His wife somewhat unwillingly remains with him with their infant son. He rides against the orcs repeatedly to avenge his slain father, Dagred. He participates in the Wit Hunt to decide the fate of the entire East Emnet with the other Reeves, and he defends Hutbolt when it is attacked by the orcs. Interestingly, his mother Theohild is named another of Theoden's sisters. So technically, him being pissy with Eomer, he's being pissy with his own cousin, because he's also the king's nephew, according to this. Because Eomer's mom was Theoden's canonical sister, and Theohild, well, that's a thing. Then we have Herluin the Fair. Isn't he so handsome? In the book, he's mentioned as the Lord of Penethgelen. He brings 300 green-clad soldiers to Minas Tirith, which makes me wonder why his tabard is blue. He rides forth with Imrahil, Farlong, and Hurin of the Keys, to reinforce Eomer when the Rohirrim arrive. In the game, though, he is besties, aka drinking buddies, with Forlong of Lothernach. And he participates in the wall defense of Minas Tirith in the epic battle in the game. And then rides out to fight in the field as well. And in the book, he dies while fighting a troll near Forlong, north of Eomer's position, not long before Aragorn's arrival on the Corsair ships. So he almost got to the catastrophe. Almost. Forlong the Old, also known as Forlong the Fat, well loved by the people of Minas Tirith. In the game, he is married to Denethor's sister Vanyalos. Vanyalos being a game creation, from my understanding. He is besties, aka drinking buddies, with Herluin the Fair and a Lord Neldis that I don't remember anybody ever talking about ever again. He and his axemen fight on the walls in defense of Minas Tirith during the epic battle, and then ride out with Imrahil and the others to reinforce Eomer. And this is the part that makes me sad. He was still living, but mortally wounded after the main fighting is done. Like when there's just a little bit of mopping up being done on the borders of the Ramasekor, and he's dying, and he knows he's dying. He and you as the player have been sent out to find what's happened to all these people. This is where you find most of these people dead on the field. You find Forlong still alive, surprising. But he asked the player to blow his horn because he swore he saw Thorongil, the same Thorongil as from his youth, on the field fighting. And he knew that Thorongil would recognize the sound of this horn, this very specific horn, and come to him. And then you blow the horn, and as expected, Aragorn arrives just in time to bid his old friend farewell. And basically, he doesn't exactly agree to tell Vanyalos that Forlong loved her, but he does say that she knows it 1,000 times over. So he should have said, yeah, I'll tell her one more time for you, even though she already knows this, you know. That's just quibbling, but still. Forlong. Good man. And then finally we have Daraphin and Dwelin, the tall sons of Duin here, Blackroot Vale. They brought 500 archers with them to Minas Tirith, and trampled to death by the Mumakil they were trying to shoot in the eyes. In the game, however, the brothers were all about glory and adventure, earning their father's disapproval. Father disapproval is a thing in Lord of the Rings, apparently. Daraphin preferred to use a sword, which departs from the lore, while Dwelin preferred the longbow, and they rarely hunted together. They hunt Mumakil in South Ithilien, and the player is asked to pick one or two to hunt with. This is before the battle, of course. And then they go with the player to Osgiliath in an attempt to damage and delay Grond. Of course, they didn't have much hope of actually stopping it. And they were also involved in a couple of storylines about how they were trying to be truthful with the other people about the fact that Gothmog couldn't be killed, and they were kind of raining on people's parades and kind of ruining morale that way, so we had to knock them upside the head. Hey guys, stop that. However, they make peace with their father, so father's no longer disapproving, and their father says, hey, let me show you boys how this is done. And then they die during the instances as they courageously try to lead the Mumakil away from you, the player, us, the player, and Reeve Ingbert and let us escape. And so they kind of, like, you hear a scream, and then all of a sudden they're dead. And they die separately. It's like one dies, and then the other one dies. I'll give you my sources, and we'll conclude this little party. Our sources are the actual trilogy, The Lord of the Rings Online, Turbine, then Standing Stone Games, the LotRO Wiki at lotro-wiki.com, Tolkien Gateway at tolkiengateway.net. However, as players quested through Rohan and into Gondor, we met these men who were destined to die, and we learned that they were more than simply names in a list. We learned their fates, sure, but it was in the telling of their lives and how they arrived at their fates that has made for a compelling, very compelling experience over the years. Players who interacted with these characters before their fall may very well feel deeper emotions about their fates. I dare anyone who did the 4-long side quest in Minas Tirith to not feel sorrow at his passing. Moments after Aragorn hastens to be with him and reveals that, yes, he was the same Thorongil with whom Forlong served in his youth. In the game, Forlong dies content that they had won the day and that the king had returned at last. While we haven't yet begun the return journey through Rohan for Theoden's funeral, more recent content, as we have seen on other streams, has taken us through what the developers call King's Gondor, and we're going back there afterwards from this. It's a bright and sunny version of Western, Central, and Eastern Gondor that isn't under the effects of the Dawnless Day. Without mentioning any specific details or spoilers, common sense will tell you that there will be an impact as we travel through the lands of men who fell on the Pelennor, or later at the Black Gate. It is a safe bet that given Pearson and Libby's penchant for keeping internal game continuity pretty tightly consistent, and never forgetting their own plot hooks, they're going to be hitting us in the feels, as the kids would say, when we do eventually begin that journey back through Rohan and further back to lands we tread oh so long ago. Even now in King's Gondor, in content for play, we're going to go visit Pinath Gelen. We're going to go to the Anfalas. We're going to go to these places, to Morlod. All I will say about other future content that you may have seen on a previous stream on this channel or on LotRO stream, the devs have not forgotten a single loose end. And I, for one, am waiting only somewhat patiently for the next Wigan marathon from Corey. It really is sometimes a bit of a sore trial to protect him from spoilers, but we must. Because his reactions are priceless, and they're also very wholesome. The tenterhooks are very, very real for us in his community, but the payoffs are always worth it. Trust me on this. Now, in conclusion, Tolkien may have given us the names of those who fell at the Pelennor, at the Black Gate, or at the Hornburg, but the LotRO developers enhanced the original text with a wealth of world building to extrapolate to give us more reasons to care about them as three-dimensional characters. I might need to invest in some tissue-making company by the time we get back to Rohan, because there's going to be a lot, I imagine. All right. Thank you for listening. And I'm going to do my little outro screen for a few moments to give myself a thing. And then we're going to get into some gameplay with a character who is playing through that epic story in the current content in Dol Amroth. And yeah, we're going to go play our lore master here in LotRO. And I hope you stick around. Otherwise, this part of it will be set aside in a separate video up on my YouTube channel. And also here on Twitch. And then the gameplay stuff will be separate. So let me do the outro real quick to get that ready to go. And then I'll start the intro. And then we'll get into some gameplay, shall we? All right, let's do the thing. I'm going to hit a button. And we'll go from there. If it'll actually work. There we go. Do.